Okay, calm down. You got rivers, man. You got rivers, man. Okay, calm down.
Hello and welcome to a special Thursday daytime live stream of the Katie Halper Show. We're so excited to be here with you. It is a special time, and so we're going to have a special stream. This is an additional stream. As people probably know, we stream every week at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but because of the rapidly moving news and developments and also propaganda and lies in the situation around Iran, we want to make sure to give you guys another update. And there was massive demand for the return of one of our guests, and we're going to bring him on in a minute. Today, we're going to be joined during the second half by journalist Max Blumenthal. But our first guest is the great Dr. That makes it sound like I was saying Max isn't great. Our second guest is another great guest, and that is the great Dr. Mohammad Marandi. He is, as people probably know, professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran, and he is joining us from Iran right now. Before we start, though, please do hit the like button. Give us a like. Give us a thumbs up. Also, please do subscribe so you don't miss streams like this when we do them. You hit subscribe and then the bell. And if you can support us on Patreon, of course, we appreciate that so much at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. So without any further ado, we are bringing to the stage Dr. Marandi. Welcome back. Thank you so much
Katie.
for joining.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
So we wanted to get another update from you because, again, as I said, things are moving so quickly, and also the Western media is so unreliable and so biased. So what is happening right now? Is there really a ceasefire, and how did this come about?
Well, the Iranians don't call it a ceasefire. They call it a cessation of hostilities. And they said that if the Netanyahu regime carries out any slight attack against the country, Iran will retaliate with full force. So, but there is no, everything is quiet now. We had celebrations after the end of the fighting, and the people came to the streets and across the country. And right now, they are in the process of burying the dead and the martyrs. On Saturday, there will be a huge funeral for those who were murdered in Tehran, and I expect it to be very massive. One of the things that I think we can clearly conclude from all this is that what the United States and what the Israeli regime have done is that they've united Iranians in a way in which I've never seen since the 1980s when Saddam Hussein invaded the country. But right now it's quiet. It's business as usual. During the period of the fighting, it was sort of like Corona. The government allowed most people to work from home, not everyone, but most people. But from Saturday, because our weekend is on Thursday and Friday, but on Saturday, it's going to be a regular working day. And apparently there's a lot of traffic coming into Tehran now. So from Saturday, things go back to normal after the funeral, I suppose.
So can you just clarify the difference between a cessation of hostilities and a ceasefire?
Well, there's no agreement between Iran or the United States or any entity. Iran simply said that if the other side stops firing from this time period, from this hour, this day, then we will refrain from firing back. That's basically it. But there's no agreement. There are no monitors. There's nothing.
Right. And I wanted to know how much of the way that the U.S. negotiated, quote unquote, negotiated with Iran has led them to not enter into an agreement with the U.S. Like, how much did the U.S. kind of waste its credibility?
It's destroyed. The United States never really had a great deal of credibility. I think one major problem is that because of the sense of exceptionalism that exists in among the elites in the United States, they feel that they are above the law and that they don't have to respect agreements. And over the 45 years or so after the revolution, the United States, on every occasion where they had an agreement with Iran, they violated that agreement, whereas the Iranians always committed themselves to the agreement. And whenever they did violate it, there was no sense of shame or there were no apologies, because the United States doesn't feel it needs to apologize to anyone or that it's answerable for anything. So the nuclear deal, which was signed in 2015, from day one, Obama began violating the deal, whereas the Iranians were fulfilling their side of the bargain. And then, of course, Trump came and tore up the deal. So as time went by, the mistrust towards the United States increased. But what Trump did was that he destroyed it completely this time around, because it became clear that the negotiations were simply a ploy, and that behind the scenes, he and Netanyahu were plotting against the people of Iran. So while Witkoff was pretending to negotiate initially, he was reasonable. Then after a couple of weeks, he shifted his position and said no enrichment, which is a violation of Iranian sovereignty. Iran, according to international law, has every right to enrich uranium. And it does so, Katie, because Iran is sanctioned. Iran has a nuclear power plant. It's planning to, it is in the process of building more nuclear power plants. And Iran knows that if it cannot provide its own fuel, then if the United States blocks Iran from purchasing fuel, our nuclear power plants would shut down and we would have an economic crisis. And for Iran, it's very important to use nuclear energy because we want to export more of our oil, because oil for us creates a lot of wealth. So the more we have alternative energy, the less oil we consume. That's why we're now, Iran is building a lot of centers for solar power. But in any case, so Iran said no, and then, but still, as they negotiated, it now has become clear that the United States and the Israelis were plotting. In fact, there's information that's come out now, or gradually coming out, that this conspiracy has been going on for years. But in any case, when Trump said the night before this blitzkrieg attack that he's against war, and then the next day after the attack, he was gloating about it and basically saying that he was a part of it, that destroyed any sense of trust, even though there never really was much, but it's just altogether gone. And I don't see how Iran will ever be able to have any deal with the United States under the current regime. And by the way, one thing that Iran has done is that the Iranian parliament yesterday passed a law saying that it will no longer allow the International Atomic Energy Agency into the country until it feels that its nuclear program is secure. And that could mean forever, because that's something subjective. If you don't feel safe, that's, if you say, I don't feel safe, and I say, no, you are safe, that doesn't change anything. If you don't feel safe, you don't feel safe. So what Iran has done basically is it has blinded Western intelligence agencies now. So I think that whether the strike on the Iranian nuclear program was successful or not, and if we listen to what's coming from the West, apparently wasn't all that successful, but the harm that it's done to the West is much greater now, because Iran says we're not letting you in. And the reason why they're not letting them in is because the International Atomic Energy Agency refused to condemn the airstrikes on nuclear structures, which could potentially have radioactive leakage, killing people in cities nearby. But the International Atomic Energy Agency refused to condemn it. And the Iranians know that this agency has been passing off intelligence. So this is the punishment that the United States and the West gets for attacking Iran.
So I'm going to ask you more about what's happening on the ground in Iran, and also about some statements from Iranian officials. But before we do that, I'm curious, did you have any expectation that Trump would be better, worse, the same as Biden? How did the Iranian government see Biden versus Trump?
I don't think they're very different in substance because both of them support the genocide in Gaza. Both of them have been supporting this Holocaust. And, so if you look at it from a human rights and from a humane perspective, both are fundamentally the same. But I think there are certain things about Trump that make it easier for Iran, even though he may be more crude and unpredictable, and he constantly changes his position. And that is that Trump says the quiet part out loud.
Yes.
And the hypocrisy of the political establishment in the United States is sort of cast aside. There's no mask. You see imperialism, you see racism, you see everything is there for you to see. And so Trump has isolated the United States in a way in which no other American leader has done before. And right now, the entire world is literally almost the entire world. I mean, if you exclude the West and a few of these countries that are bound to the West, the entire world is on Iran's side. The global South, public opinion is on Iran's side. And that, I think, is because, the empire grows weak, but also because Trump is not good at hypocrisy. So in Iran, people hate Trump. But for example, I think that Obama was far more effective than Trump in dividing nations, in using U.S. soft power, because Obama was the person who actually imposed maximum pressure sanctions on Iran, which killed many Iranians, especially at first because it was a shock to the economy.
Right.
And so people died of a shortage of medicine and that sort of thing. But Obama, because of the way in which he presented himself, because he was of mixed race, his father was black, that there was a certain sympathy for him and a certain attractiveness that he had that Trump does not have. So Trump is more crude. So in a sense, exposing Trump or showing is much easier. It's much easier to mobilize people against Trump than it was, let's say, for Obama. Biden was not like Obama, but
He was like
still,
between those
he
two,
was
maybe.
not at. Yeah, perhaps, yeah.
And how much of a difference? A lot of people, not this election, but the election before, a lot of people who are engaged in the lesser evilism argument and said that people should vote for Biden. Some people said, well, he's going to reinstate the Iran nuclear deal. He did not. So I have two questions. One is, why didn't he? And also, had he reinstated it, would we see a different outcome right now? Would Trump have been hamstrung in ways that he wasn't, thanks to Biden?
Well, I was before the election, I was in a online seminar with a think that was being held by a major think tank in Washington. I don't want to name them because it's Chatham House rules and that sort of nonsense. But I mean, I if anyone quotes me anywhere, I don't care. But anyway, and that was a think tank that was very closely affiliated to the Democratic Party and Biden. And some of the people went into government. So before the election, they were saying that if Biden becomes president, he's going to revive the JCPOA. And in that session, this was during Corona. So in that session, I said, that's not going to happen. Even though I'm sitting here in Tehran and these people are, close to the corridors of power. After Biden was elected, we had another session, the same group, literally. And I was the token Iranian, I think. Maybe there was someone else too. But again, they said, yes, when he comes to power, one of the first things that he's going to do is he's going to sign a presidential decree or a series of decrees, and he's going to go back to the JCPOA. And I said he's not going to do it. I said I don't believe there's a chance in the world that he'll do it, and he didn't. So
and why did you think there was no chance? How did you know that? What made you predict that correctly?
Well, I didn't know it, but the point is that the United States will never. I mean, it has a history of always trying to put more pressure on Iran.
Right.
And in my opinion, even when I was in Vienna when the JCPOA was signed, the nuclear deal in 2015, and that day when it was signed, the foreign minister, I was like a media advisor to the team. And after it was signed, I told the Iranian foreign minister, Dr. Zarif, who's a friend, I told him that I don't believe the Americans are going to abide by their commitments. And I think he was not happy with what I said. But I explained that the United States, and I sort of referred to this a bit earlier, the United States, it believes, I mean, the elites believe in American exceptionalism. And so they don't have to abide by commitments. They will abide by commitments until they feel that they don't have to do so anymore. And literally on the day when the deal was signed, hours later, just a couple of hours later, I think, the US Treasury imposed new sanctions on Iran. And it just went downhill after that. I knew that was going to happen. So the United States does not have the ability to reverse course when it is hostile towards a country. Let me give you an example. Apartheid South Africa. The United States supported apartheid South Africa. So did the Europeans. Nelson Mandela, as I'm sure you know, he was a terrorist,
right,
according to the United States. And so was the ANC, which was one of the key opposition to apartheid in Southern Africa. I mean, there was also Rhodesia, but the focus here is on South Africa. So when Nelson Mandela was freed from prison, and by the way, what Iran says about Israel, because you constantly hear that Iran wants to destroy Israel, Iran wants to wipe it out. Iran's policy has always been, from day one, the same as its policy towards South Africa, and that is dismantling Israel and to have equality like in South Africa. Now, regardless of like the distribution of wealth issue and the injustices in South Africa, that's a different matter. But the equality, the racial equality that we see in South Africa, that is the model that Iran has always said must happen in Palestine. So that aside, so Nelson Mandela and the ANC were terrorists, according to the United States. Nelson Mandela was elected president. He was still a terrorist. He retired from his presidency, and he was still a terrorist. He retired from politics, and he was still a terrorist. And shortly before he passed away, did they finally remove his name and that of the ANC from the terrorist list? That's how the United States is. They'll put you on the terrorist list. But when they want to take you off, even for Nelson Mandela, who Hollywood made movies about, and everyone was pretending that they were with him from day one when he visited different countries, he had to get special permission to go to the United States to take part in the UN General Assembly.
Did not know that. Wow.
And so did government ministers who were members of the ANC. They had to get permission to enter the United States because they were still terrorists. So this is how the United States functions. And that's why I don't have any real hope of a meaningful agreement between Iran and the United States, because the United States sees itself as above the law, and the United States is good at war and aggression and sanctions and brutality, but it does not do reverse gear well at all. I mean, look at Cuba. And what threat is Cuba to the United States? But they are strangling the country. I was there a year and a half ago. It's really sad. And it's worse now, apparently. It's really sad what the American government does to Cuba. But will it relent? Which president has really turned things around? No one. And it's worse today than it's ever been before.
Right. Yeah, and they just fearmonger about it, about Cuba. And I mean, I don't think anyone believes it at this point, but I think people who defend U.S. imperialism and hegemony are fine with the U.S. just bullying a country that they know does not pose a threat. So I wanted to.
Katie, look at Russia. Look at Russia. I mean, there is one exception to the rule, and that is ISIS and Al Qaeda Syria. They removed their sanctions, but not Cuba. But look at Russia.
Right.
When the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia was literally begging to become a part of the Western club. And from day one, the United States and the Europeans were trying to undermine Russia, even though it was not the Soviet Union, even though all
Right.
the 14 other states separated themselves from it. But they initiated a dirty war in Chechnya, and they gradually pushed NATO. You know the story. But the point is that the United States is relentless in its imperialism. So I was never optimistic about a deal, and I'm not optimistic now. But I think now in Iran, there's a consensus that we just can't deal with Trump.
Right. I actually play this game sometimes where it's who said it, Trump or Chomsky, because as you pointed out, Trump does take the mask off, right? But of course, they say things that the other one would say, but with a very different moral framework. So, Trump once said that he wasn't going to do anything to Saudi Arabia after they killed Khashoggi because they were buying a lot of weapons from us, which is something Chomsky would say, but Chomsky would be critical of it. And Trump was just kind of embracing it, saying it like it is. Or I remember during the debate, the one and only debate between Trump and Biden this time, Trump actually said Israel wants to keep fighting because Biden said Hamas are the only ones who want to keep fighting. So Trump says, no, what do you mean? Israel wants to keep fighting and they should finish the job. So you have that kind of like open, masks off embrace of very ugly stuff, which I do think can be clarifying and helpful. I want to ask you
I agree.
Oh, and by the way, guys, this is great news. We have 4,000 people watching, but I haven't trained you because only 945 have liked. And I know that it's not 3/4 of you are hate watching. So give a thumbs up if you haven't already. We got to we should be
Well,
at
you
over
can't be
2,000.
sure. I mean, I am Iranian. I am
Right.
from the axis of evil. So maybe 3/4 are actually hate watching.
That is possible. Yeah, that is possible. And if we do, if it's possible, then thank you for the clicks. We really appreciate it. You're helping the algorithm. I wanted to ask you to respond to something that was said Thursday morning. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei declared victory over the Zionist regime, quote unquote Zionist regime, giving his first comments since since I guess the cessation of hostilities. So let's have a listen to what he had to say. And this is a CNN video.
The US president said that Iran should surrender. That means there's no more enrichment. It's the question of Iran to be surrendered. To mention the word Iran is too much for the mouth of the US president to even pronounce it, to say it. A great Iran and the word of surrender, they don't match. They don't match with each other. It's a joke. It's a ridiculous thing to say. I would like to congratulate the great nation of Iran. I want to congratulate them for a few reasons. First, I would like to congratulate them for victory over the fake regime of the Zionist regime. With all those claims that the Zionist regime were making, they almost were crushed under the blows of the Islamic government.
So can you, what's your reaction to this speech, to these comments here?
Well, first I should point out that Ayatollah Khamenei is a very eloquent speaker, and his Persian is fantastic. He's a very good speaker. And he's also an Arabic speaker, he's an Azeri speaker, and he is fluent in English. He reads English and he reads novels. And so when he speak, if you compare, if there's a good translation of what he says, and you compare it to the language of someone like Trump, it's just, I mean, he's even though he hits Trump hard, but he's very polite in the way in which he does it. But what he's basically saying is that if this had continued, the Israeli regime would have been crushed. But some people say, why didn't Iran continue? And sorry, I'm sort of interrupting I'm digressing a bit here, but war is not an objective in itself. Iran did not start the war. Iran wanted to punish the regime and make it and humiliate it. But the objective is not to have just people die in Tehran or other cities or innocent people anywhere. The point is to humiliate Netanyahu and the regime. And what Iran did was exactly that. If the war continued for another few days, we would have had the same result. The Israeli regime has been shown as no longer being invincible. It is day and night the Iranians were pounding it. And at the end of the war, during the last 2 or 3 hours before the cessation of hostilities, it was Iran that was pounding it with missiles and drones. So clearly Iran had the upper hand. If on day one, there was a blitzkrieg attack. It was a sudden attack. And obviously, when you carry out a sudden attack, you're going to have success, especially since the Israeli regime had assets that Ukraine would never even dream of having. In other words, the sort of weapons that Israel has, the regime has, they would never give to Ukraine. The Americans and the Europeans gave the best of what they have to Netanyahu, and they even used their own armed forces to help him as far as they could. But despite all that, and despite that blitzkrieg attack, the Iranians rallied, they regrouped, and they started pounding Israelis. So by the time the war ended, it was the fact that Netanyahu was begging for a ceasefire reveals everything. The Iranian objective, Katie, is for this regime to collapse ultimately, and for this apartheid system, this racist system, this evil ideology of supremacism to fall apart. And the belief is that is happening. That is the belief in Tehran. The belief is that the regime is dying. It's not going to die tomorrow, next week, or next month, or necessarily next year, but it is dying. It has been exposed for being inhumane, no matter how the West has tried to justify the atrocities and the genocide and the Holocaust, no matter how much they've tried to hide the brutality in the West Bank or the genocidal attacks in Lebanon or the dirty war in Syria, no matter how they've tried to hide all this, but it's been exposed. And now the only thing that was left was this false sense of invincibility, that it was untouchable. And even that is not true. I mean, you see how Hezbollah, even though there was a blitzkrieg attack on Lebanon too, and they killed many thousands of innocent people, but they took out many members of Hezbollah's leadership. But still, they failed during the fighting to capture a single town. And Hezbollah's their heroism, I think, is unbelievably unique, because they made all those sacrifices not just for their own people, but they made those sacrifices for Gaza, because they wanted to draw away Israeli forces during that year or so fighting, so that there would be less pressure on the people of Gaza. And that, I think, is unique, that sort of heroism. But in any case, the Israeli, and the same is true in Gaza, they haven't failed, they haven't succeeded in taking Gaza. But still, this image of Israeli invincibility is something that the West constantly tries to depict for the rest of us, or it tries to create a narrative for us to believe. And during these 12 days or so in this defense, that was destroyed because people were watching across the world, Iranian missiles hammering Tel Aviv, and other cities, and strategic targets being struck, and the Israelis not showing what was hit. So it was obvious that those missiles, many of them were very precise, and they would not even talk about the drones that were hitting different targets across the country. So he was saying that we won the war. We won the war, and that the Israeli regime, despite the United States and the Europeans, was humiliated. Of course, I don't believe this is the end of the story. I think that the Netanyahu regime and the Israeli regime in general, they are aggressive, they are unpredictable, they have no red lines, and so Iran is definitely going to have to prepare itself for another act of aggression. Maybe in the months ahead or days ahead or a couple of years from now, there'll be a false flag operation somewhere in the United States. They may kill someone, they may blow a bomb, they explode a bomb somewhere and try to pin the blame on Iran to restart this fighting. I have no doubt that that is something that they would be planning, but the Iranians are going to have to prepare, because I have no doubt that we're going to see more aggression from this regime. As long as you have an ethno-supremacist regime, you're never going to have peace. The same was true in South Africa. As long as there was apartheid in South Africa, the whole of South Africa was unstable. It wasn't just South Africa, it was the frontline states in Southern Africa. They were all suffering as a result, and they continue to suffer, because this is, the damage, it's like the plunder of Africa in previous centuries and in this century. Even if it ends, it will take very, many decades, if not centuries, for a continent or for people to recover, whether it's Latin America or whether it's Africa or whether it's West Asia or East Asia. The damage is done. So in this case, in the case of Palestine, as long as there's an ethno-supremacist regime that believes that other people are subhuman, peace is it's just not possible.
Sorry, I was muted. You talked about the ethno-supremacist regime, and what I think is fascinating is that if you listen to American politicians and American media, and you heard that term, you would think that they were talking about Iran, because that is how Iran is presented, right? As this theocratic, backwards, sectarian, violent, bloodthirsty regime. It's always called the regime, right? You never hear regime applied to the Israeli government. But as you
and
also,
that's why I keep saying regime. That's
yeah,
why I try
no,
to
that's good, yeah.
reverse the narrative.
It's good, yeah. And on the other hand, you see Iran, and this reminds me of Hezbollah too, because Hezbollah also got told, and I know there was a major shift in Hezbollah, right? But present day Hezbollah still is called very sectarian, religious fundamentalist, violence. And again, in both cases, you see these movements. In the case, in the case of Hezbollah, I guess party and movement, and then in the case of Iran government, you see these people defending people who are not of the same necessarily religious group, right? They're Sunni, Shia. In the case of Hezbollah, also, I remember interviewing someone, this great journalist, Gadi Francis, who's Christian. And she's like, well, their ideology is like very weird to me. She didn't mean it in a normative way. She just meant it's not like doesn't believe what they believe religiously or even ideologically, but she's like, but they keep me safe. I mean, there's no question. So what does motivate Iran to stand up for Palestine, especially given that, I think we're really used to governments being very strategic, not very principled, very self-interested, very hypocritical, very full of it?
Well, that would take hours to explain, I think, and but and I'll try to keep it short, and that is that the revolution itself, and what I'd like your listeners to do and viewers to do, and I'm sure that many of them will be thinking, these mullahs and whatever, but I know that some of our mutual friends have traveled to Iran, and that, so maybe your listeners could ask them how horrific Iran is, or how evil we are and how authoritarian we are. And then I think they would see that a lot of this, if not almost all of these narratives, are false. Before the revolution, as the revolution was happening, the leaders of this Islamic revolution in Iran, they had three foreign policy. There are many issues that had to do with the regime, the Shah, brutality, corruption, and all that. All that aside, there were, I would say, three key foreign policy issues for Iran that the revolutionaries were pursuing. One was for decisions to be made in Tehran and not outside of Tehran, not in London, not in Washington, nowhere else, not in Moscow. And so the revolutionaries were fiercely independent. The second was South Africa. The Iranians wanted Iran to cut off ties with apartheid South Africa. Iran was exporting oil to South Africa. 90% of the oil consumed in South Africa came from Iran. As soon as the revolution happened, they cut off diplomatic ties and cut off trade. And they began supporting the ANC and other movements, the Pan-African Congress and others, and including the military wing of the ANC. The third was Palestine. And back then it was the PLO. So Iran cut off ties with the Israeli regime, stopped funding it because the Iranian, the Shah, was giving Israel money to develop weapons and then for Iran to be able to purchase those weapons. But Iran cut off ties and expelled the Israeli regime and opened a Palestinian embassy in Tehran, which was run by the PLO. So these were policy issues and that were pursued as soon as the revolution began. And it was not just the focus was not only on these. Iran was supporting Cuba, it supported Venezuela. During the really, really terrible time in Venezuela a few years ago when there was no electricity and the Americans were trying to bring down the economy, the Iranians went there to help and to restore electricity, to revive the power plants and to revive the refineries. So Iran was assisting Venezuela too. Of course, Venezuela also assisted Iran when it could. So this was anti-hegemonic, anti-imperialist, and an anti-hegemonic and anti-imperialist revolution. It was an Islamic revolution, and it's also, I think, very much influenced by the grants. I know many of your viewers are not very much acquainted with this, but today is the beginning of Muharram, the month of Muharram. And on the 10th of Muharram, the grandson of the Prophet, the Holy Prophet, and by the way, for us, Christ is a prophet, an infallible prophet. Moses is an infallible prophet. And the same is true with Prophet Muhammad. And so on Ashura, this grandson of the Prophet, Imam Hussein, he was martyred in the city of Karbala, and he refused to submit to the despot of that era. And he said no to humiliation. That's a phrase that is often quoted in Iran, Hayhat min nadillah. And he was standing up for the oppressed and the marginalized. And when he was murdered, he and his companions were murdered. His sister, Zainab, she was steadfast. She was captured along with the Imam Hussein's household and the families of his companions who were also martyred. And she was steadfast, and she raised awareness, and she stood up to the despot, and she was the voice of the oppressed. So these two individuals, the grandson and the granddaughter of the Prophet, they are very big in Iranian culture. And during the next 10 days until Ashura, every day, on the last 2 days, most people in Iran wear black. in mourning. So this happened 1,400 years ago, but it is deeply a part of Iranian culture. And for Iranians, the Palestinian people are the oppressed. And therefore, it is a top priority for Iran. And I can give you another example. When Bosnia was alone and it was being destroyed, it was the Iranians who went to Bosnia to help the Bosnians and save the country, or to save the population there. And so for Iran, Palestine is, they're an oppressed people. And it's not just because they're Muslim, it's because they're oppressed. As I said, although
Like South
Iran's
Africans
resources
weren't
are limited.
Muslim, right? Obviously, for example.
Exactly, or Cuba.
Right.
Cuba is communist. And
Right.
Cuba is not like Venezuela, by the way. Venezuela, the government is not as all opposed to Christianity. But in
Right.
Cuba, you did have that tradition where it was opposed to Christianity. And we believe in God and we believe in Christ.
Right.
And but Cuba didn't have that. But still, Iran supported them because they were the oppressed. So that is very, very big in our culture. And unless someone comes to Iran during these 10 days, especially during the last 2 days, in 8 or 9 and 10 days from now, on the 9th or 10th of Muharram, which we call Tasu'a and Ashura, they will not really understand how much impact this and how much influence this has on Iranian society. Even people who are not religious, they may drink and they may do but they have a particular respect for these 2 days because of what happened. So this is very much a part of Iranian culture. I mean, Iran has an ancient civilization. It's a civilization of that has thousands of years of heritage, and there are many reasons. I mean, Iran is a country. If you go to Esfahan, if you go to Shiraz, if you go to different places in the country, you'll see how rich and how both before Islam and after Islam, how rich the culture is and how ancient and how old it is, and that has an impact on society and how societies view themselves. But I think this particular issue about the grandson of the Prophet is something that makes Iranians very steadfast, and that's one reason why Hezbollah sacrifices not just for Lebanon but for another people. That's why Ansarullah in Yemen, they sacrifice for the people of Palestine, and I find that quite extraordinary.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And obviously, I think and viewers who watch my show know I was being sarcastic. I was, asking you a question that I find the premise of which I find ridiculous. But it is really fascinating because Israel presents itself as this. Well, it's a little complicated because they're such opportunists. So they sometimes present themselves as very religious. Then they present themselves as, very humanistic, enlightened, secular, open-minded. They're so good on LGBTQ issues. But again, the ones who are the religious fundamentalists or ethno-nationalists, ethno-supremacists are Israel. They're the ones who are going around and killing people. Now, it's complicated because they don't care if Palestinians are Christian or Muslim. So it's not actually about the, theology. But they certainly are ethno-supremacists. And you never hear people who criticize Iran
and they're not even Semites. I mean, for the most part. I mean,
right.
There's no real ethnicity there. I mean, some of them are Semites, those who are Palestinian Jews, and but most of them come from Europe. More recently, many come from, let's say, from other parts of North Africa, West Asia, Africa, and elsewhere. But most are not Semites. The Palestinians are the real Semites. But that's not the issue. This mythology, in any case, that they've created around this makes them a chosen people. And when you're not a chosen person, then you're out of the club. It's pretty clear. You're Amalek. And whereas in Iran, you have Jews, and you have a Jew in parliament, a Jewish MP, because the Constitution after the revolution says that Jews must have an MP. And
Which
I
is
said, I
why I
think I
may
said
move
this
to
on your show
Iran to
last
have a
time.
more likely. That's how. If I ever want to
Yes,
be an MP, that's probably my best move, my best chance.
yeah, you have a good shot, especially since you have a show, and then you could just, focus on Iran and get some votes.
Exactly. Yeah. But no, this is, I think it's just so clarifying and important because even smart people, I mean, you won't be surprised by this, but even smart people who are good on some issues, they really walk around with this cartoon character image of the Iranian quote unquote regime, and that they're the irrational ones. And I actually think that, like, kind of related to what you were saying, I think it's helpful in some ways to see just how erratic, dishonest, untrustworthy the Trump regime is, call it regime, right? Because it really blows it out of the water that the rational actors are the West and the irrational actors are Iran.
And I'm not saying that Iran is some utopia
Flawless, right?
and that everything here is fantastic and I agree with everything that happens here. That's not the point. In fact, sometimes some people say, why do you always defend Iran? And I say, look, they're attacking Iran all the time, day and night. And like, if I'm given a small platform at some conference or on some, that seminar that I alluded to, or on CNN or anywhere, of course I'm going to defend Iran because people only hear. I mean, if the BBC, even though it's no longer the. I mean, Western mainstream media doesn't have the impact that it did. But I would always say that in the past, that if the BBC gave me a show one day a week for half an hour,
Sure.
yes, I'd badmouth Iran for 10 minutes and I'd defend it for 20 minutes. But if you're going to give me like a 5-minute slot every 4 months, of course I'm going to defend it against them because they're the ones who are carrying out genocide. They're the ones who are imposing sanctions on ordinary people. They're the ones who overthrow government after government. It's not, it's not Iran that's doing it. It's not Hezbollah that's doing it. When you in my worldview, if you compare to Iran or Hezbollah to the British government or the American government, Iran and Hezbollah by far are the moral actors. Not now, not yesterday, not years ago. But does that mean that I'm saying Iran is? No. If you come to Iran and you sit among me and my friends,
Right,
and just hear our conversation, we never say anything good about the government or the country. We don't say, look how great the metro is, or look how good the public services are, the hospitals are good. We'll always say how horrible things are. That's just how we are. I think in that sense, the British are somewhat similar
right.
to us, that we grumble. If you get in a taxi, people will grumble. If you get in on a bus, and it's not as if there are no legitimate grievances, but the point is that we have a tendency to grumble. But the very same people who are grumbling are the people who, when General Soleimani was murdered, came out on the streets in the millions.
Right.
And I promise you that on Saturday, when we have the funeral in Tehran, it's going to be massive. Even though people have been on the streets multiple times in the last couple of weeks, I'm willing. Well, I'm not a betting man, but I'm absolutely certain that you're going to have massive crowds on the streets of Tehran. And they're the same people who grumble. If you get in that guy's taxi, or if you get in his bus, or you go to his shop, and you say, well, how are things? He'll say, terrible. The economy, terrible. Everything, terrible. That's just, that's how it is. But actually, there's a paradox here, too, because they say Iran is authoritarian and people are not allowed to talk. But whenever a Western journalist comes here, people say whatever they want to them. And then they say, oh, so there's dissent. Well, what is it? Is it an authoritarian regime where everyone has to be quiet? Or is it a place where people are speaking against the regime and they're capable of doing so without living in fear? You have these contradictory narratives.
Right.
But since they're all negative, people assume that they're correct. They're both correct, even though they can't be one and the same. So in Iran, if you have public debate and some say we should do this and some say no, it should. In the Western media will say in Iran there are deep divisions, and the regime is fraught with internal problems, and there's a big divide. In the West, you call that checks and balances, democracy, debate. In Iran, it becomes something else. So Iran is
Sign of
never
weakness, right?
presented.
The
Yeah,
regime is about
and
to crumble.
abnormal.
Yeah.
And abnormal.
Right.
And that's what regime actually means. It's meant to say this is not normal. It's going to collapse. It's going to fall. And that's one reason why they miscalculated in the war, because for them, Iran is a regime. People despise it. People hate it. So all we have to do is push. We put sanctions. It still hasn't fallen. Okay, now we're going to wage war. It will fall. They kill so many senior commanders on day one. And what happens? The exact opposite. People come rallying behind the armed forces. And the Islamic Republic of Iran not only survives, but it wins the war. I mean, it didn't knock out the Israeli regime, but it still won. It had the upper hand. In Tehran, there were celebrations. There weren't any celebrations in Tel Aviv. So the point is that Iran is a normal country. It is not this land of craziness. You will have all sorts of views in Iran. You have 90 million people, you'll have 90 million different views in Iran. And just like you will have in other countries that are normal.
Right. Well, I believe you have another interview or something that you have to leave for, but I'm going to bring someone on, a friend of yours, to just say hi, because I know you guys know each other. Max Blumenthal, friend of the show and friend of yours, I believe, Dr. Marandi.
Hey, brother.
Well, he's even more evil than me. So, I mean, now it's really your show is getting really sinister.
Yeah.
I was held hostage by the professor for about a couple of weeks. And it was
but he had no money. So we just had to let him go.
Oh, yeah.
No one was willing to pay.
And no one to pay the ransom. Yeah.
No one.
Yeah. My country didn't want me. Israel didn't want me. I was like Meyer Lansky to Israel, but much poorer. So they sent me on my way. They're very hospitable hostage holders, though, in Iran.
Well, and any final words for this interview that you want to share, Dr. Marandi, before we let you go?
Not
Stop
really.
holding you hostage.
I just want to thank. No, I just want to thank you and thank Max and thank all the courageous people who stand up against these very powerful narratives, the students, all those people who've been working to create awareness about Palestine. And now that we should remain focused on Gaza, on the ongoing genocide. And Max has done excellent work. You've done excellent work, and so have many others. And you're all heroes. And I'd like to just thank you and your viewers, who all are, I'm sure, active in their own way. And that's it, basically.
Well, thank you so much. And I think we're going to have to start adding a daytime stream, because honestly, people are very in demand, and it makes a lot of sense. Also, since I focus so much on foreign policy, it's easier to get people at this time. So we'll have to coordinate our agendas, our date books, Dr. Marandi. Thank you so much for joining.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Great seeing you.
Bye for now. Bye, Max.
Bye, Mohammed.
Great seeing you.
Talk to you soon.
Max, welcome back to the show.
Yeah,
Last time we had you on, I believe you were you'd been speaking truth to power to Anthony Blinken.
Yeah, it was the Biden era.
Yeah, it was a binary. Yeah. And now I don't want you to get a big head, but we are going to be playing a clip of you where you get a mention by someone. That's coming up. But I want to ask you, before we get into that and kind of the most recent current events, can you tell people about your trip to Iran and what you learned there and what you saw there, and if anything surprised you?
Well, I went as part of the Sobh broadcast festival and participated in a panel discussion with Alistair Crook, Mick Wallace, and Claire Daly. My close collaborator, Anya Parampil, was there as well, and did a panel. And, it was a great group, incredible discussions. We put them up on our Substack site. And that was sort of a gateway to seeing Tehran. And I got to go to Isfahan as well, which is a city in the central plateau of Iran that is one of the most beautiful cities in the world, really representing the thousands of years of continuous civilization and human habitation in Iran. And this was, I guess, early May, late April. So in the period in the middle of negotiations, supposedly indirect negotiations between Iran and the US. And I was able to get lots of access to see what was on the table and what was coming next, to talk to diplomats who were very close to the negotiations, to talk to average people in the street of all backgrounds and political perspectives. And you're going to get a wide range of views from people. People are not afraid to share their views, including people who are very critical of the government or have deep grievances with the Islamic Republic. Got to spend time with people in their homes. It wasn't like a Potemkin village tour that I was on. It was very chaotic and open. And people were extremely hospitable to me as an American. Everywhere I went, people asked where I was from because there are so few tourists there because of sanctions. And they were really grateful to see an American there. I also got to spend time with the Iranian Jewish community in Isfahan. I went to Sunday prayers, one of their synagogues. There are several synagogues operating in that city, and Tehran has a larger Jewish population. Got to meet with members of their community as well. And got a tour of Iran's ballistic missile, drone, and air defense program at the aerospace park outside Tehran, which is operated by the IRGC. And I mean, it would take too long for me to describe everything I saw, but I got a fairly decent picture in the course of 2 weeks of where Iranian society was. I mean, if anything was surprising, it was how well Iran was doing under fairly devastating sanctions, which were dealing an economic blow to many of the people that I spent time with, especially people who were middle class, who expected more out of life and whose currency was basically being turned into worthless paper by the US sanctions regime deliberately. I mean, this is deliberate. But Tehran was incredibly clean, functional. I took the metro to meet Professor Marandi at the Behesht-e Zahra Martyrs Cemetery, where many of his friends from the Iran-Iraq War were buried. And, by the end of the trip, it was clear that Iran had demonstrated that it can stand as an independent country, or I should say the Islamic Republic had demonstrated that it could stand as an independent country, that it had viable institutions below its, the clerical leadership, that it was not kind of this tin pot dictatorship that was on the verge of collapse, that there was an opposition there, but there was also a loyal opposition that believed in the Islamic Republic. There was a debate about which direction the country should go. And it became also clear to me by the end that war was coming. The negotiations were kind of a sham. I should have been more forceful in calling that out, but I did call it out. But I wrote a piece summing up my conversations with diplomats close to the negotiations. And at the end, I said, Iran is preparing for a harsh summer of confrontation. And that took place about 3 weeks or a month after I left. And the famous glass house, or the offices of IRIB, Iran's main broadcasting offices, sort of, I mean, you could compare it to NPR or PBS or something like that, but it's much bigger. It's much more central to Iran. And it was a building built in the 1940s, a very elegant building that sat directly next to the conference hall where the Sobh festival put on our panel discussions. That was bombed. It was hit with 6 bombs by the Israelis about a month after I left. So now Iran is picking up the pieces, but I'm also not surprised by Iran's performance in this war, where it came out with extremely high public morale. The demonstration of support for Iranian independence came not just from supporters of the Islamic Republic, but from people who are just Iranian nationalists. And so the regime change plans of Israel have been set back, Israel and the US, possibly decades by this war. And again, just having been there in 2 weeks, that didn't surprise me. If you've been heavily propagandized in the US, I mean, we've all been propagandized about Iran. And so I think the things that would be most surprising to most people, including Americans who are watching this, people in New York City or who might have anti-war, anti-imperialist views, is that you don't see women being forced to wear the headscarf in the streets of Tehran or major cities anymore. So you'll see like large numbers of women just without headscarves, just walking around, and there's not really any clear enforcement in the streets. There was a process of reform that was clearly taking place. There's public concerts, public music performances. It's a wild place. You'll see at the Friday Parvaneh crafts and kind of arts market in Tehran. You'll see youth dressed up like goths, or there'll be like some punk rock kids. I smelled marijuana in the air. There were like lots of hippies there. This is all happening kind of beneath the surface. All the kind of like propaganda we're hearing from either liberal feminists or MAGA Islamophobes right now about Iran is completely exploded by the reality once you get there, the cultural reality. And to the extent that the US lays off Iran, it will continue to go through this natural, organic process of internal reform.
Right. I want to ask you about this kind of renewed obsession in the media with Iranian quote unquote sleeper cells.
Yeah.
Lo and behold, according to reports, there are already between 17 and 130 Iranian nationals who have been arrested, and even more have been thrown into U.S. immigration and customs enforcement, ICE, have been thrown into ICE detention centers without being officially arrested. Some have no criminal history at all. And I want to show a clip of acting director of ICE, Todd Lyons, on Fox News. This is from Wednesday. And here he is talking about the Iranian nationals they've been arresting.
Let's bring in the acting ICE director, Todd Lyons. You wonder where to start with all of this news going on. But let's start with the 17 Iranian nationals that were arrested by ICE this week. The president weighed in on that aboard Air Force One on his way to The Hague. Listen to what he said here.
Biden led a lot of supercells, and Biden was an incompetent president and had no idea what he was doing. He hardly ever signed a document. Other people signed documents for him with the auto pen. It was gross incompetence. And among everything else, he let a lot of supercells in, many from Iran. But hopefully we'll take care of them. What Biden did to this country should never be forgotten.
So the president there talking about the potential threat from sleeper cells from Iranians who've entered this country illegally. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, estimates that well over 1,000 Iranians entered this country illegally in the past 4 years. How do you assess the level of threat?
Well, we are at a current heightened threat level, and what we're assessing right now is exactly what the president talked about, and what you heard Secretary Noam talk about to the governors this weekend, is we are at a heightened threat, and we need to focus on all these high-risk countries that we did have so many individuals come from. These places that have turmoil, that didn't come here for a better life in the United States, that did come to potentially have harm. So what ICE is focused on are all those high-risk countries that may house known suspected terrorists that we know are here in the United States, and we're focused on apprehending those and taking those out of our community.
So what I'm trying to get my mind around is whether Homeland Security is focusing in on trying to sort of narrow in on Iranian suspects because the nuclear negotiations have fallen through, or is there a flurry of activity and brand new threats because the negotiations fell through?
We've seen an increase in threats, but we've had that since January 20th as well. We do have a list of several high-profile countries that are considered high risk that we are focused on, that we want to go ahead and make sure we find those individuals that can.
By the way, Max, let me know if you want me to pause at any point, okay?
I will.
Okay.
Came here in the United States without any type of vetting or without any proper vetting, or who snuck in. We want to make sure that we're protecting Americans here on American soil. And that's one of the key things ICE is doing, is preventing these incidents before anything bad does happen.
So the former
Is he
DHS
some weird
Secretary-
tanning bed thing? It looks like he's like white. He kind of has that Donald Trump thing where it's like really bright right under the eyes. That suggests some weird tanning.
The Secretary
bed or
under
something,
Barack
but-
Obama, Jay Johnson, was on Fox and Friends this morning. He was talking about the potential threat from Iranians and others in this country. Listen here.
The presence in this country of undocumented migrants or Iranian nationals who have links to Hezbollah, IRGC, is, in my judgment, a domestic law enforcement concern of the highest magnitude.
That's something you don't hear every day. A Democrat who's saying this really.
He's a good Democrat.
How is the threat being addressed? You alluded to it a little bit just a second ago.
So we're actively working with all of our Department of Justice partners.
Wait,
and our
pause it for a
intelligence-
second.
Yeah, sure.
Jay Johnson, by the way, is a Columbia University trustee who is a key point of contact for all of these spooks and law enforcement goons during the crackdown.
And where's he? He's at which arms? What is he?
Raytheon, I think.
Yeah,
I don't
Raytheon
remember.
or
One of
yeah.
those. One of the big five.
Yeah. Also, not to be. He looks like he has something in his right cheek. Like he kind of has like a
Yeah.
or like he's hiding something. I don't know what it
That's
is.
some chaw. I don't
Yeah.
know. Zin packs are much smaller. So.
Yeah.
It's in this country
Howard Zinn
of
pack.
He's chewing something.
I know, right?
undocumented
What's it called?
migrants or
Iranian what do they call it?
nationals who
Like
have
Big
links
League Chew,
to
maybe?
Yeah.
Hezbollah, IRGC, is, in my judgment, a domestic
Okay.
law.
You know, you did see that list of individuals that were arrested. You have one that with admitted ties to Hezbollah. We also arrested a former sniper from a hostile country who snuck into the United States. So those are the type of individuals we want to locate before they can do anything here.
What
in
about the
home zone.
gotaways, though? We don't even know where they may be.
Gotaways.
You know, and that's one of the things that we get to focus on, and that you
Yeah,
do
Uber
see
got
when
away.
you do hear that ICE is rounding up people that may not have a criminal conviction. But we're attempting to locate all of these gotaways, and those are ones who have never been encountered by a DHS entity before, and those are what we're focused on, because we want to find those ones before they do any harm. We don't want to have another 9/11 or another major incident. We want to be on the tip of the spear to make sure we locate all those individuals that may have come into the U.S. illegally.
Tom Holman said on a podcast this week that he has to live separately and apart from his wife and the rest of his family because of
That's why.
Lucky wife.
Oh, man.
Lucky wife. Yeah, right. Exactly. She's like, it's because of safety reasons that we
Yeah.
need you to. Yeah.
Death threats. Dan Bongino said the same thing. He's like,
Oh,
me and my
really?
wife are separated. We're divorced because of these death threats.
What a great fall man. Yeah.
threats against him and his life, and he doesn't want
I always
them
blame
to
Iran
get
when I'm having a
potentially
fight with my wife.
Yeah. Exactly.
wrapped up in that. It's a pretty, I don't know what the right adjective is, like a pretty shocking, sad state of affairs when like a ranking cabinet official can't live safely on U.S. soil.
Well, you know, it is, to your point, it's very sad to the fact that
Who
when you
believes
look
this?
at, you know, cabinet officials like that, you look at Secretary Noem, you look at men and women of ICE who are under constant threat just because they're doing a mission. And when you think about what ICE was formed from the 9/11 Commission, where we were a law enforcement agency to combat situations before they happen, yet they're villainized, demonized for doing their job. It is a sad state of affairs where a law enforcement official can't do their job without some type of demonization or threats to themselves or their family.
Yeah, and sometimes it's elected officials, city officials who are doing that. There's this woman, Cynthia Gonzalez, in Cudahy, California, in Los Angeles County, who appeared to be encouraging local gangs to look out for their own turf against ICE. Listen to what she said.
You guys tag everything up, claiming hood, and now that your hood's being invaded by the biggest gang there ain't a peep out of you. It's everyone else who's not about the gang life that's out there protesting and speaking up. We're out there like fighting our turf, protecting our people, and like, where you at?
She's now under investigation by the DOJ for those comments. What do you think of the fact that she seems to be encouraging gang members to go after ICE in their neighborhoods?
You know, and you hate to use harsh words, but her comments are absolutely disgusting. To have an elected official like that, to have the vice mayor of a city who has a city that is...
I don't even know about that. We'll look into that. Have you heard anything about this? I just meant to play the first part, but then
I just know that ICE is looking for Iranian sleeper cells in Home Depot parking lots.
Yeah, exactly.
And school down the street from me was raided by ICE. Clearly,
Really?
they were looking for serious terrorists by arresting 2 parents and leaving the children there after they took them away.
Yeah, that's clearly about security.
ICE is really popular out here. You know, I hear people saying great things about them everywhere I go. Working class people who are American citizens, they love them, and like I don't know why anyone could possibly dislike some plainclothes agents just going and rousting people, smashing into the van of the father of 3 U.S. Marines, throwing U.S. citizens on the ground for looking like brown people. I mean, why would this possibly be unpopular? Why would Tom Homan be unpopular?
Yeah.
It's a real mystery, but they're clearly out there to catch snipers from hostile countries.
Yeah, Tom Homan, who, by the way, he sounds like he has like those acorns in his cheeks that Jay Johnson may have.
And they might as well deputize Stuart Seldowitz.
Oh yeah, they should. That would be good.
That guy is the reason that Mamdani got elected, by the way.
What do you mean?
It was like a backlash against Stuart Seldowitz going from truck to truck.
Yeah. That guy.
Yeah, a bunch of terrorists.
By the way, speaking of,
that's basically ICE is just like a tough Gentile version of Stuart Seldowitz. What they're doing, they're just like, they're not. They're looking for terrorists. No one's going to believe them. Like if there were some attack, no one would believe them except for Republican boomers who feast on that Fox News brain slop. Everyone will think it's a false flag. Like the American public is done with this crap.
Well, speaking of the American public being done with this crap, I wanted to show you a really interesting tweet and article from someone I know you really, really respect, and that would be Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And here she is.
I saw this today. This is great.
Okay. She has a really great idea about who to run for mayor, since obviously it can't be Zoran. Bill Ackman for mayor of New York. Zoran Mamdani's radicalism can't go unchallenged. So, Max, are you going to volunteer for the Bill Ackman campaign?
This can't be real. I will. Well, I definitely want Bill to get involved. I want him out there. I want him campaigning. I want to know more about him. I want to know about his partner or wife. I want the public in New York to know more about her relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
Ooh, do
her
tell.
MIT lab and her plagiarism. And I want to know more about, Bill Ackman shorting Nike's stock after running a phony anti-Semitism campaign about them. I want to know how, Pershing Square does business. I want to know how he afforded that $14 million glass penthouse overlooking Central Park. He's a real man of the people. Yeah. I want people to, let's take the Zionists out from the Zionist billionaires out from behind the curtain and put them on the stage in front of the spotlight and let the people decide. I think this is a great idea from neocon DEI hire Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who faked her entire life story.
Right.
And whose husband, Niall Ferguson, the colonial Winston Churchill ball washer, paid students to write attacks on me in Bill Kristol's Weekly Standard after I exposed Ayaan Hirsi Ali for making up her life story. I just want them all to be out there instead of just be hiding,
right.
As Bill Ackman did when he was part of a WhatsApp group of 50 Jewish billionaires in a scenario that Joseph Goebbels or Julius Streicher could not have conceived in their worst anti-Semitic propaganda films, basically bribing Eric Adams to crack down harder on Columbia students. That's their idea of how democracy takes place.
And how to battle anti-Semitism, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you battle anti-Semitism by hiring private detectives to investigate students, and
right.
All these slime bags just think they can run cities and run the country through a WhatsApp group from behind the scenes.
Right.
So,
and they're happy to dox people. They should have the courage of their conviction and be public about what they're doing.
So yeah, I totally support Ayaan's proposal.
Will you be his press man? Bill Ackman's press man?
No, we should have Shmuley be his press man. I mean, bring all these guys out from behind the curtain.
Yeah.
What did she call him? The Michael Bloom. He's the new Michael Bloomberg.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's great.
And I mean, wait till New Yorkers find out about the rest of his politics. Like, okay, this election was kind of a referendum on Israel. Cuomo made it that.
Right.
They thought they could turn the tables on Zoran by getting him to, cower before the combined force of the Zionist movement. He didn't do it. And then they realized people are just sick of this Israeli bullshit being shoved down their throats. They're sick of watching children show up in their Twitter timelines chopped into pieces by Israeli missiles. They're just fed up with the whole thing. There's a new generation that can vote and it's over. But I mean, people are also sick of landlords soaking them. They're sick of the city being unaffordable. So let's hear what Bill Ackman has to say about that.
Yeah. Very popular, I think. Well, Max, speaking of people who battle anti-Semitism, I want to play a clip of the great Jonathan Greenblatt being asked a great question by the great Molly Jong-Fast. I couldn't believe this. So here, she's asking a really bold question. This was on MSNBC. Brad, do we have this one? This is the Jonathan Greenblatt clip. If you missed this and you're just watching now, not live, and you want to see the full interview with Max Blumenthal, which is very good, and he talks to us about a story about a Mossad stenographer, basically, and the CIA, and how John Ratcliffe is a kind of Mossad stenographer. If you want to see that, you can do that at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. We will, of course, as always, be here live Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Anything else that I want to announce, Brad? No? Okay, shaking his head no. I want to thank everyone so much for stopping by. I want to thank Brad. I want to thank Max. I want to thank Dr. Marandi. Thank you, Nate, for the research. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And I will see you next week. Bye, everyone. And remember to see the full episode. You're definitely going to want to see it because we got great gems with Max Blumenthal. Patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Bye, everyone.
Okay, I'm